Welcome everyone to another episode of Down But Not Out. Today I'm joined by Spencer Farber. Spencer spent a number of years in sales roles before starting his entrepreneurial journey over 10 years ago. Founding several companies and serving as the director of PandaDoc, Spencer took his knowledge of sales and founded Cliently in 2016. Cliently is the first truly AI-based sales engagement software, allowing you to leverage AI to fully understand and action on the buyer journey. Spencer, thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you, Nick.
All right. I don't know if my introduction sufficed, but I'd love to hear an intro from you for the audience.
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty good overview. I've been sort of in the sales space for my entire career. I had my first SaaS opportunity at PandaDoc. In fact, they were super small. I was the first U.S. employee. They were called Quote Roller at the time. Got to work hand in hand with the CEO and a couple of others that were starting the company. So really exciting to learn how to build a SaaS from scratch. Left there about 4.5 + 5 years ago to start Cliently based on a lot of the knowledge of go-to-market and building campaigns, etc. And started Cliently, with an initial product hunt release and went from there.
And at PandaDoc, it says the director on your profile, and were you in sales and marketing there? Like, what was your overall? Because PandaDoc has done really well.
Yeah. So I mean, to give you an idea, again, I was the first employee of the U.S. Literally my first few visits there were staying in the bedroom in the house next door with the CEO, and then we would go work in the kitchen with I think maybe one other person, our marketing person. So I was in charge of customer success. I was in charge of sales, support, account management. It was all in one. I mean, we were literally that small at that point. I think we're doing maybe a handful of a few $1,000s of revenue. Again, it was a different product called Quote Roll at the time, pre-funding. And so, as we scaled and as we grew, that position, of course, changed, to leading sales efforts in different capacities. And of course, different people took over, customer success and things of that nature as we grew.
And that led to Cliently, right? Because that was the big next step. And tell us about Cliently, what it does, and kind of where it came from.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I've always seen, as a struggle, whether it was at PandaDoc or other businesses, was people have not heard of you. And of course, you want to start building that, traffic organically, but to find really the right type of customers out there, no matter what size you are, in a scalable way, you need to have a way to facilitate sales engagement, usually using outbound. And doing that consistently. And I saw that constantly a struggle, whether it was to, craft a campaign, whether it's to create an omni-channel campaign, meaning more than just email, whether it was being able to track that. And then from a salesperson's perspective, because it wasn't just marketing, being able to see what's going on with those campaigns on an individual basis so you can react to that, because that's really what salespeople do, is they take in information and then figure out how to customize the experience depending on who that specific customer or potential client might be. And so Cliently is a sales engagement tool. You can think sort of along the lines of a sales loft or an outreach, but we're kind of veering into our own category to where we are ingesting all sorts of data, whether it's from Salesforce or your CRM, or even other ones, Pipedrive and HubSpot, Intercom, Chargebee, Stripe, bringing all that data together to help you understand who the clients are that you should be focusing that attention on at any given time. And as far as the AI piece that we're very excited about, we haven't marketed that really very much yet, and haven't really even announced it, but about 6 months ago, we acquired a AI technology. We're building that into our product today. One of the other bigger struggles that we see is lead scoring. Either it's a complex setup or you don't have it at all. We're bringing AI lead scoring to where you always know who the hottest leads are based on all of your data, and it's constantly getting smarter by continually looking at more of your data as it grows. So that's kind of where we are today.
Yeah, definitely familiar with Cliently, and in my realm of sales and marketing, looks like you guys are doing some great stuff over there. The AI stuff sounds really cool. Definitely a place for it if you have that large data set like you're mentioning. Would love to. I know that the Down But Not Out story is related to Cliently, so walk us up to that happening. So you founded Cliently, and then how long after before you had your Down But Not Out moment, and then go into what that moment was?
Yeah, so I mean, Cliently was bootstrapped, right? So we didn't have any funding. I was a sole founder with really one developer that was freelance, that was helping build the project up. And so we slowly, built our first version. Took a few months, listed on Product Hunt, did okay, and then started to continue to build, and basically had to work really hard to get every single client. I think at that point, maybe, probably about 3 to 4 months or something like that after launch, maybe had, I don't know, 20 clients paying us like $15, $20, $25, whatever we could
Been
get at
there.
that point.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, we were bootstrapped. Being a sole founder, I did not have a technical co-founder. I just had freelancers. I think actually two: one that was working on mainly front end, one that was working on back end. If memory serves me correctly. Um, and then basically we had two major blowouts in a span of I think it was a few week period. Us being an email sending tool, and I'm embarrassed to say this again, this is very different than Proc today. Four and a
Yeah.
half so years ago, we send emails for clients with these automated campaigns. And the first big issue was our system started to send emails from the wrong clients. So it was sending a client, if you had we had a client, Joe at apple.com, it was sending from Beth at Microsoft.com. So
Yeah.
about the worst you can do in terms of security and privacy. That's number one. And to sort of make matters worse, number two, a couple of weeks after that, we lost our entire database. And so what that means is we didn't lose our code, but we lost our database. So all the records that we had for our clients, all the contacts that they had that our clients had added, people knew we were essentially in a beta at that point, so they weren't relying on our system heavily. But we lost all of that. It was a miscue by our developer who was trying to clean the database, clicked the button he should not have, didn't realize there was no backup, those type of things. And so basically the $400 or so of MRR that we had done everything for to scrape to get there, out the window, gone.
Yeah.
We did what we could with the clients that we had to describe the issue, and honestly, it wasn't make or break for them because again, they knew we were newer and they were just sort of giving us a try. But essentially, we lost all their all their accounts that were tied to our billing system, so we would had to go get those by hand by the ones we could. So we lost most of our MRR at that stage.
And back to the first issue, did that affect all clients that you had on the platform?
It affected just a few.
Yeah.
Again, we only had, I think, maybe, what did I say, 20 clients or 15 to 20 clients at the time.
Yeah.
And I would say it affected, 5 or 6 at least before we realized the issue and then of course fixed it. But still, like, it's a major, issue with trust and security and everything else.
Oh yeah. And did you lose
Okay.
any of those 15 to 20 at that point, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then the second issue was a few months later,
A few weeks later.
A few weeks later, and then you lost all the 15 to 20 at that point, or the remaining.
Lost, I think like 80% of them.
Yeah.
Because with the database being lost again, it wipes out all of their information that they had in our system.
Yeah.
Any contacts they had added, any campaigns they had created, those type of things. And so, yeah, that's kind of where it left us.
Yeah, and you mentioned that a lot of them were understanding because you were younger as a company, right? And but were there any bad reviews that surfaced online? Was there anything that or even bad feedback? Did you get a lot of bad calls?
No. And this is where, and I don't know if this is where, the segue is going to be, but this is sort of what leads to how we came out of it. And I can go speak to that, but no, there weren't really bad reviews or anything like that from it. We reached out to everybody, directly as we could. And some were just like, all right, well, we tried it. It wasn't for us. And moved on.
Yeah. And it was just yourself and 2 freelancers at this point, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And bootstrapped, so it was just yourself that had put in money. You're paying the freelancer's salary.
Exactly.
Do you know roughly how much you'd put in at this point?
At this point, probably like somewhere between $30,000 to $40,000, to get the product up to a point where you can, have something that you can actually that works.
So you would have been out 30 to 40 grand then, if it was if you'd walked away at that point, right? Personally, you invested that.
Also had walked away from a high paying position, all sorts of things.
Yeah. I think that helped frames the severity of it, right? It was early on, but you had already personally invested in this. You were the only founder in it too, which leads me to another question. I don't know if you've had time to reflect on this, and do you think that it would have been easier if you had someone else that had some skin in the game with you, right? Like a co-founder, someone else to go with you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it wasn't necessarily about, oh, I want to keep all of this for myself.
Yeah.
It was more about finding the right person. And I
Yeah.
just didn't have the technical, co-founder. I did not know that person.
Yeah.
Um, so absolutely. It's one of those things where having a partner or multiple partners, uh, people handling different facets that maybe aren't the part that you are, experienced or skilled at, definitely important.
Yeah.
And I
That's definitely
think
been.
that's sorry, I was going to say, I think that's where PandaDoc, was able to succeed at the very beginning because they had those areas sort of solidified. We had somebody that was great at marketing. We had a very charismatic CEO. We had a thorough CTO, and we had myself on the sales side. So when you have all of those pieces with, or people that are very strong in them handling it, it helps quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's been a common theme throughout the podcast and other stories that I've heard is going at it alone is tougher. And like I have a co-founder at Visitor Q, but he was mostly fractional for the past few years. So I can completely understand that going at it alone does become tougher. It goes back to what we were talking about before the show too about misery loving company. If you have someone there with you, it's a lot easier.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. So you're at $400 roughly MMR, 15 to 20 clients. You put in some money yourself, walked away from PandaDoc to run this. And you're 4 or 5 months in, it sounds like, after launching, building the product. And this happens. You lose pretty much all those clients. What happens next?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing that I always try to do is I don't look at like getting upset and putting blame, right? Because at that point, it's not even because I'm such a great human being or anything. It's just, it doesn't solve the issue, right? And so, first off, we looked at, all right, what can we do? So we went and we reached out to all, most of the clients. Again, only a couple stayed. We looked and said, what was the last, sort of instance that we had of our database, which I think was a couple months back, where we didn't even have, half of those clients before at that point. So it gave us a little bit of something, and that's where we started. Reached out to at least tell them all the problems so that we didn't get any of those bad reviews and things of that nature that you mentioned. So then the other piece was we took, and we also knew from next time we need to make sure we have our AWS backed up, number one. Number two, it set us on a plan. This was about a year and a half later, but at least gave us the thought that we need to be using, a really strong backbone for our email provider. That's not one that we built with a freelancer. And so eventually, as we got better developers, we ended up going through APIs, and we use now the same backbone as Pipedrive does for their email sending. But that being said, here's sort of how I looked at it. Man, we just lost all of our clients. But from the flip side, all we lost was $400 of MRR. So I, really looked at it that we, had these extra few months, we built up the product, we sort of figured out more ways to go to market and those type of things in that period. And ultimately, the sort of silver lining here was that nobody had heard of us yet. So we were completely under the radar and we hadn't lost that much. And I looked at if we were like a year further down the line, it would have been so much worse.
Yeah.
Those reviews that you were talking about would have been, coming out in mass, like, hey, like, we can't believe that we lost our data because we were really using the tool at this point, or sending email, so those type of things, it sort of helped us get past it because so few clients. And from there, we just kept plodding forward. Um, and we're able to turn around. We were, again, pre-funded at this point. We were able to, again, this is just from memory at this point, bring in about $35,000 of revenue before the end of the year. So let's say those issues happened in like, May or June of, I think it was 2016, we were able to bring in 35,000, probably, 5 or 6K MRR before the year was out. So we were able to turn the corner. And again, it was just looking at like, let's just start from scratch, but we have this product now.
Yeah.
So that was, I wish I could say there's some super resilience story or creativity about it, but it was really just one of the things that I'm sure you get with a lot of these different calls that you've done. It's about perseverance, right? It's about, continuing to go even when you get, sort of knocked down.
Yeah.
And, getting knocked down doesn't always mean that what you're doing isn't working. It didn't mean that, our developer wasn't, necessarily someone that should be overseeing an entire product. Sure. But it didn't mean that our product wasn't something that people wanted. It didn't mean that we weren't building in the right direction. And so there were still signs there to keep going, and we did that.
Do you think back to that perseverance, resilience side, really just pushing through? Where did that come from? obviously you have it sounds like a positive attitude towards it when it happened, but was that something that you had built up throughout the years? Like where does that come from?
I mean, I think a lot of it is going back to my sales background,
Yeah.
and a lot of people say for every, however many yeses, expect, 10 times that no's, right?
Yeah.
And so I always looked at those as not just getting used to a no, but also for me, it's figuring out why you're getting a no and how you get to a yes. And in this case, the no was, we had this issue, which means the product wasn't going forward. How do we get back around to where it is? And
Yeah.
so I think it's more just a sort of that sales gene. And a lot of people have that, right? You just sort of look, how do I, figure it out and fix this problem versus
Yeah.
dwelling on it.
Yeah, yeah, that's the big thing, right? It is attracting to go towards that dwelling side. And a lot of people do, but if you keep pushing forward and you keep that mentality of it could be worse, right? That's what I kept telling myself throughout the whole thing. It's like, okay, we've lost 20% of our clients, but what it could be 100%. So just keep going through. And
Exactly.
then, like you said, or you alluded to, you ended up raising around after 2016. And where's
Yeah.
the company now? It's definitely progressed.
Yeah, so I mean, we've raised about just under 2 million. I mean, it wasn't actually one round. We've raised, raised a little bit here, a little bit there. Some great partners that have invested in us. We have, brought on, as I mentioned, that AI technology, and the founder of that company has now become, my partner in the company as well. So it is nice now to have that person to lean on, that has expertise in other areas. Uh, and so, yeah, I mean, we've grown pretty well. We have a couple hundred accounts now, much bigger accounts than we were, than we had at that point, different type of clientele. And so we're, getting ready to raise our first serious, seed round of a few $1 million as we speak.
Right on. That sounds it's exciting, and you can definitely see the progression after that down but not out moment. And you mentioned about bringing on the partner, and we talked about this earlier as well. Was that kind of a lesson that you took from there of I would not being non-technical, and there'll be a lot of non-technical founders that listen to this. Is having someone with some skin in the game, like a partner or a co-founder, would you say that was important after the experience you went through?
Yeah, I mean, I probably would tell you before it was important, but didn't
Yeah,
realize it as much. But even then, it was always about finding the right person,
yeah,
because it wasn't until 4 years later, so that, I still found a partner, and I wasn't going to bring that person in unless, the right fit. But yeah, I mean, it's nice to have that person where, when you're working at 11 o'clock, on a Friday night, or, 2 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon, that person's working as well, and being able to, continue to push the company forward versus, an employee. Even really good employees, it's just not the same mindset.
yeah. No, yeah, I completely agree with that. Back to take a few months back into 2016. You mentioned you guys were bootstrapped. How much cash did you have left? Do you remember roughly? Were you ever close to walking away at any point?
I wasn't close to walking away, but I was almost always out of cash. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
I didn't have a lot.
yeah,
And I was like, how am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to pay the freelancers, those type of things, and keep moving on. So those thoughts were always, I'll tell you, one time I actually wasn't an expensive car, like a ten
yeah,
thousand dollar whatever car that I had. I went to, one of those areas where you could get cash for giving them the title to your car. I've since paid it back, of course, but
yeah,
I did that, for
yeah,
example. I gave up my title to my you know Toyota Corolla, to be able to keep going. So you do what you have to. And again, it doesn't mean that every one of these stories leads to success.
right.
However, I think it is uplifting for, people to understand that a lot of us go through this, and, will Cliently make it to that pinnacle of, 100 million, $1 billion company? I hope so. I mean, there's
Yeah.
nothing there that says 100%, but I hope so. But that being said, I know that we wouldn't be where we are now if we had stopped before.
I was about
You
to say
know,
you have a 0% chance of reaching there if you'd given up in 2016. But
exactly. And we've
yeah,
gotten through a lot of those hurdles, since. So
yeah, yeah. The big thing with entrepreneurship is that uh, if you were think of it like a sport or a game, there's no bell at the end until you ring that bell and you tap out. Right.
yeah,
That's really it. Is when you give up. That's when you lose. That's when you forfeit. Is when you actually ring that bell. It's not like any other game or sport where there's an actual end to it. If you keep
it's true.
going, then it doesn't end. You just keep going.
Yep.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, I think it's a great story through and through, and obviously Cliently's doing great now. You said a few hundred clients working on raising another round, and I think there's definitely some good lessons in there. Anything that you would tell a founder that's going through that moment now that you haven't mentioned?
Just in terms of how you look at the problem, um, work on fixing the problem, and that actually keeps your mind going forward instead of dwelling on it, right? Because
Yeah,
if you're in that moment and figuring out what do we do, how do I move forward, it doesn't allow you to dwell because you're just simply dealing with any other issue that you could have just as easily had that wasn't, necessarily as significant to your company, but it allows you to really focus on that, and it doesn't give you time to sit there and think about the bad, and then by the time you've gotten past it, you're past it.
yeah. And along that line as well, you've probably had other moments in Cliently since, maybe not as bad, but do you think that the first one or the first few kind of helped you build up that resilience and that mentality?
Maybe I can also say sometimes they create, and you probably notice too, additional bruises that
Yeah,
sometimes make you feel like a punch drunk fighter. So I
yeah,
don't want to always say that the more of these knocks that you get, the better off you're for it. But I do think it's something that at least strengthens your resiliency a little bit. At least to understand, okay, I've gotten through this, I can get through that.
yeah. I think that's an important point too. The you can only get hit so many times as well, just like a boxer, right? But
Hmm.
just keep getting back up. I think that's the big thing. All right, Spencer, that was great. I think that's a really good story to recap again. Started your career in sales and marketing, went and started your own sales and marketing software and Cliently. $400 into your journey in MRR. You there was an issue with the software because of the some of the freelancers that you were utilizing early on. That led to some emails being sent from the wrong address, the database being deleted, which pretty much made you start over from zero. 2016, fast forward to 2022 now, you have a few hundred clients. How many employees are you guys at?
We're about 10.
10, yeah. You've raised about $2 million. You're raising even more, and definitely a strong recovery after an early setback. So, thank you, Spencer, for your time and for sharing your down but not out story. To everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, leave us a review. Also, subscribe to the show to be alerted of new episodes. And finally, like and share the episode on social media. Help us spread the word of Down But Not Out. All right. Bye, everybody. Bye, Spencer.
Thanks, Nick.